Have you ever stopped to think about crying? I mean, really think about it. On the surface, it seems like a huge evolutionary mistake, right? It makes us look weak, vulnerable. But it turns out there's a really surprising evolutionary reason for it, and that's what we're going to dive into today.
So let's just get right to it. Picture this. You're fragile, you're helpless, and you're making a whole lot of noise. Crying. It feels like a terrible strategy for survival. You're basically setting up a flare for any predator around saying, "Hey, easy meal over here." So the big question is, why on earth did natural selection just get rid of this trait? It's a fascinating paradox, and believe me, the answer is going to completely change how you think about survival.
All right, so to solve this puzzle, we have to completely reframe how we look at crying. It's not about being weak as an individual, not at all. It's really about the world our ancestors actually lived in. And you know what? It's probably not what you're picturing in your head.
And here is the absolute key. Crying was never a strategy for one person trying to make it alone in the wild. Forget that idea. Instead, it evolved to be a really important part of a group collaboration system. Think of it less as a personal flaw and more as a social tool.
To really get this, we've got to bust a pretty common myth about how early humans lived. It's a super important piece of this whole story.
So in our heads, we often have this image of a tough, lone caveman, right? Battling mammoths and the elements all by himself. But the reality was a whole lot different. Early humans were completely, utterly dependent on their group to survive. You see, our ancestors lived in these small, tight-knit groups, maybe a few dozen people. They needed each other for literally everything. Hunting, finding food, watching out for danger, taking care of the kids. If you were cast out, if you were on your own, your chances of making it were basically zero. So in that world, the number one thing for survival wasn't being the strongest person. It was being accepted and supported by your group.
Okay, so that brings us to the secret jobs that crying had. These were its super effective social signals.
From this group survival point of view, crying actually evolved to do 3 absolutely critical jobs. And these weren't weaknesses, no way. They were incredibly effective social signals that gave you a huge advantage if you were living in a group. Let's break them down.
Okay, first off, it's a really efficient distress signal. It trembles way farther than a whisper and takes a lot less energy than yelling your head off. Second, it's a powerful, almost automatic trigger for other people to want to take care of you. And third, it's a universal sign that you are not a threat. Let's take a closer look at those last two, because they're really interesting. Just think about it. When you hear a baby cry, what happens? Your attention is immediately grabbed, right? You might even feel your heart rate change, and you get this urge to help. That's not just you being a good person. It's actually a hardwired neural reflex. The sound of crying basically flips a switch in our brains that makes us want to protect and care for whoever's in distress. So the people who cried were just, well, they were more likely to get saved by their group. Simple as that. Crying was also amazing for just cooling things down inside the group. In a small community, fighting over food or resources could be a death sentence. So by crying, you were sending a very clear signal. You are broadcasting, hey, I'm not a threat. I'm vulnerable. I need help, not a fight. This made it way less likely that someone would see you as a rival, which could be just as deadly as a saber-toothed tiger.
Okay, I know what you might be thinking. Wouldn't it just be better to seem tough all the time, to just, suck it up? Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, the answer is a big, fat no.
And yeah, let's talk about the elephant in the room, predators. Of course, if you're all alone in the woods, crying is a terrible idea. But here's the thing, an early human who was already alone and vulnerable was in deep, deep trouble anyway, whether they were crying or not.
So this is the really crucial point. Natural selection didn't punish the act of crying itself. What it punished was being isolated from the group. Crying is a tool that's designed to be used inside the safety of the group, where the sound is much more likely to attract your friends than your enemies.
Let's just compare 2 different strategies here. On one hand, you have type A, the stoic. This person hides their injuries, pushes through exhaustion. What happens? They get an infection and die. Or they make a stupid mistake because they're tired and have a fatal accident. Their genes? Gone. Now look at type B, the signaler. They get hurt, they cry out, they show they need help. The group rallies around them, they get taken care of, they survive, and they get to reproduce and pass on their genes. You see, evolution doesn't care if you look tough. It only rewards you for surviving long enough to pass on your genes.
So, when you put all these pieces together, you start to see that crying isn't some primitive glitch we've failed to get rid of. It's actually an incredibly sophisticated and fine-tuned social tool.
The kinds of behaviors that evolution did get rid of were probably things like just screaming all the time, for no reason. What was kept and what was refined over thousands of years was the ability to use crying as a strategic signal.
And you can see how sophisticated it is just by looking at how we cry today. It's totally contextual. We don't just burst into tears for no reason. We usually do it in safe places, often with people that we trust. And of course, it's regulated by all these social rules about when it's okay and when it's not. All of that proves it's not some simple reflex. It's a complex, evolved social behavior.
So if you remember one thing from all of this, let it be this. Crying didn't evolve to help us survive in the wild. It evolved to help us survive in a crowd. And for a species like us, the species whose entire success story is built on the power of the group, well, that made it one of the most important survival tools we ever developed.